Yakuza 6 is a lot of things. A farewell to Kazuma Kiryu, the protagonist of the series in his 7th consecutive game, counting 0. The first entry in the new engine for the PlayStation 4 generation of Yakuza, as the previous 2 releases were still technically PlayStation 3 games. But was the move to the new engine a flawless transition, or is Yakuza 6 the ultimate betrayal of the fanbase? After the events of Yakuza 5, Kiryu decides to take the fall to save everyone around him, yet again. Going to jail to ensure Haruka and the orphanage won't get in trouble due to his involvement with them. As he leaves prison, he finds out Haruka went back to the orphanage, indirectly linking the kids back to him. Shortly after this, she went missing for a long time before finally being found in a hospital near Kamurocho with a child. Kiryu decides to take the child under his care while searching for his father, Haruka's lover, and the person who put Haruka in the hospital. In true Yakuza fashion, everything keeps escalating from here. Yakuza 6 was a polarizing game before it finally got its release in the West. I feel that now that it's out, and people have actually played it for themselves, a lot of that has faded away, but the feeling that is left in its wake is still one that is conflicted. Not due to a lack of quality, but because every step forward also brings another step back, to a point that a lot of it feels like a side grade. But we'll get into that more during a later part of the review. I just want to make it clear that this review is neither an attack on the game, nor one towards people on the other side of the fence of it. It's a bit more balanced than that, and I think Yakuza 6 genuinely deserves it. With the move to the Dragon engine, the shiny new engine that the Ryu Ga Gotoku series is going to move forward with, it was inevitable that a lot of things were going to change drastically. Much like the move to the previous engine with Yakuza 3, it's not entirely a clean transition here, and that feeling of the game not moving forward cleanly is something that exists entirely beyond the scope of just the engine shift and what it brings along with it. To say that Yakuza 6 has a rough start would be an understatement. The intro is scattered, moving back and forth between events and heavy on exposition. Kiryu's story has a lot of baggage at this point, and it makes it really hard for the story to get started, as it almost feels like they need an excuse to move him away from the position that he was in at the end of Yakuza 5, and into a direction where he can actually do things in 6. Now, Yakuza games always struggle with pacing early on, but characters who barely show up in the game get introduced as if they play a major part later on, and even after the main introduction sequence is over, the pacing is still not the greatest early on. It's unfortunately a problem that stays for most of the game. Nearing the end, I was starting to get the feeling that the game was finally beginning in terms of gameplay coming together, that we'd passed the introduction portion, but no, this was the final chapter. In much the same way, the story takes a couple of leaps in the middle of things, making it feel like we're skipping several steps of build-up. This might just be a problem of game length, as it's a fairly short title for a Yakuza game, but I couldn't help shake off that I'd only just begun when I got to the events that made it clear that the credits were going to roll very soon. It takes a very long time to really have any combat under your belt in Yakuza 6, a feeling that gets amplified by 2 other problems surrounding it. The first being the combat speed being much faster than before, and enemies also taking way less damage before they go down. Near the end of the game, enemies finally have health and appear in larger frequency, making it feel like previous Yakuza titles. But early on, fights feel like they end way too fast. I hope later games on the Dragon engine end up feeling more like the late game combat encounters, because there is something here that is definitely worth exploring. It just takes Yakuza 6 almost the entire game to get there. What is there though, I do like. After the previous games, being able to just run up to someone and punch them in the face during the animation that was previously a loading transition is incredibly gratifying. Most of the standard combos and moves are pretty alright too. My main issue comes from enemies not having enough health for most of the game, a simple variable that can easily be changed by setting you against a larger group of enemies in one go. It doesn't always work, as it tends to become a bit of a clusterfuck when you're fighting a ton of dudes while backed up by other dudes and every dude is attempting to attack at the same time. People often complain enemies just stand there and attack one by one in a lot of games when they focus on large group fights, waiting for their turn to be attacked, but when you you play a game that didn't think about this too deeply, you start to understand why games do this. The more moving obstacles you have in a fight, the faster things become an incomprehensible clusterfuck, especially when things aren't moving according to a clear pattern. This is why in Musou games, enemies just sort of stand there waiting for you to attack them, and why Arkham combat plays out like a game of Simon Says. There are more elegant solutions to this problem, so I'm curious what the direction the Yakuza series goes in with the future titles. Grabbing someone to spin them around and send bodies flying in every direction is a fun novelty, but only for so long. So long, in my experience, being the entire game's length. The only real issue I had with it is that if an enemy hits a wall or an object, Kiryu just sort of lets go of them mid-throw without doing any damage. With a move to a new engine that is way much more based on physics, you'd think there would be something in place to ensure slamming someone into an object causes a form of impact, but instead it just drops the entire move as if nothing is happening. There's a heat move you can do in these situations, especially a throw that hits two people, but using heat moves for crowd control isn't the most elegant solution to a problem. The heat system rework needs more work in general. They tried going for a simplification where activating heat essentially turns you into beast style, picking up every object in the vicinity mid-combo. This is not the greatest, as the largest chunk of heat moves are hidden behind the end of regular combos while in this heat form. One or the other of these two things would have worked, but as it is, heat is something you want to activate to get those special moves at the end of your combos, which would then get disturbed by Kiryu picking up whatever is closest to him. You can avoid this by drawing the fight away from objects, but I don't get the feeling this is something that was supposed to work this way. The game still mostly shines during one-on-one fights though, even though most of the time it's clear that's not what they were shooting for. I don't know if I should count this as a failure in design from the development team, but anytime you're one-on-one with a good boss is a time that it feels like the new engine is really going to shine after they get more experience working on it. But then the game also tries to make a lot of the boss fights more about larger crowds than normal, so it genuinely feels like this was not the intent for combat. While the game did need its frame rate halved to run properly, something that the previous engine games didn't have to do, I can't say this is as much of a detriment as it's often made out to be. I'm usually a stickler for games demanding fast reflexes and reaction times having a better frame rate, but I would disagree that the Yakuza games need this to do well. As much as Yakuza 6 is several steps back from variation and polishing of previous titles, 0 especially, I don't consider combat in the Yakuza series to be the most in-depth or highly technically focused in general. It's satisfying, yes, it requires planning of how to use meter, and learning how to both space and pace the fight while keeping control. These are not things that have been washed away as much as some people will lead you to believe. Most of what is lost though is freedom of expression, which is something that I do miss. That said, the combat is fun, I just wish there was more of it. I think the lack of combat early and the lack of a Coliseum shows they're aware of the problems with it, especially since this stuff is coming back in Kiwami too. I also really appreciate the direction that they're taking the stat system. It's a lot like Yakuza 0's, while still keeping a separation between money and experience. Experience is instead split into multiple subgroups that each represent a different aptitude, which are then spent on abilities requiring a number of each. Every activity from combat to minigames to even just eating gives a bunch of experience within numerous groups. Splitting the experience into smaller groups helps keep individual numbers lower, so each event can give you a minor amount of experience that still feels valid. So if you want to play Virtua Fighter 5 at the arcades and say that this taught you how to become a better fighter when you're actually fighting people, this is entirely possible. I do wish that Virtua Fighter 5 could make me feel this way, because instead it's making me feel like I completely forgot how to play the game. Virtua Fighter is a lot like speaking a language, and if you don't keep it up, you forget all of it. The only game that curb stomps you even more over a lack of experience is Puyo Puyo, which you can also play. This is not a knock against the inclusion of either title. They're both fantastic minigames and can stand on their own as selling points for people interested in them, like me. And it is nice to have my hands on Virtua Fighter 5 again, even if I completely suck at it now. There's a bunch of minigames and sub-stories as you'd expect of a Yakuza title. I'm kind of let down by the amount of minigames in general, though the quality of the ones that are here is pretty good. The Clan Creator strategy minigame featuring New Japan people was really cool, and I hope it helps more people get into New Japan Pro Wrestling, as they now have faces that they can easily recognize set up for them. Okada literally making it rain money was especially a nice touch. What amazes me most though is the quality of the sub-stories, which are at the level of Yakuza 0 for most of them. the writing, and typical societal commentary as a period piece, something that Yakuza has become increasingly good at over the years, is in full effect. And it's funny how some of these sub-stories only grew in relevance since the Japanese release, like the dumbass YouTuber attempting to get into shit with Yakuza just for views. Sub-story scenes are now fully voice acted, which is a genuinely impressive move considering the quality of the voice work is pretty high for most of it. It only gets a bit jarring when the movement and animations during sub-stories remain how they've always been for the rest of the series. Characters still move as if they just have static text fields, so their voice work doesn't match their expressions and body language. It's a minor gripe, as I understand non-critical content doesn't need to have the focus that the main story gets, and it's something that feels like it's getting in the way less and less the more time I spend playing it, because they're all still a very good experience. Troubler is an interesting addition, essentially becoming a way to add simpler sub-stories without going all out like they did with the regular ones. Your phone app gets notifications of trouble in the area, usually resulting in a quick combat sequence if you make it to the right place in time. It's fairly straightforward, but it gets the job done. Any special occasion to lead towards combat scenarios with more reason than just being random is a welcome one. I think most of what really hurts Yakuza 6 in the end is just Kiryu at this point. It might have been a better idea to transition away from him early into the game, or even have 5's ending be what moves him out of the series. Previous games that had other characters to play as generally had them as the more interesting parts of those titles. And it's not because Kiryu is a bad main character either, he just has way too much baggage that he brings along with him, which also heavily limits what you can do with him. Even if they move him to another part of the country with another supporting cast, Yakuza 6's intro sequence is a good example of the baggage getting in the way of the game, and to a lesser degree, the same goes for the ending sequence. I'm not going to spoil it, but it is a bit disjointed and makes most of it feel less final by involving characters who don't show up for most of the game. The actual final thing, the one involving footsteps though, that's a good moment to close the book on Kiryu, and I really hope they keep it closed from here on out. I do understand why they wanted to make Kiryu's last title a transitional one. The entire theme of the game plays into it, but there's also the fear of transitioning to a new engine with a different character. Whoever is going to follow in the footsteps of Kiryu is going to have to go big or go home. Doing that with a first entry on a new engine is going to make this just about impossible, so from this angle I understand why they ended up doing this the way that they did. Though how well this pays off depends entirely on Shin Ryu Ga Gotoku, or whatever they decide to call this in English when it comes out. So, do I recommend Yakuza 6? I mean, if you're a fan and you've played the entire series up to this point, then yeah, most definitely, you should play it. It's not a betrayal of the fanbase, it's not a Twin Snakes situation, or anything like this. It's a well-made transitional game, dipping its toes into a new direction. Definitely not a starting point. In fact, I don't even think it's a great game to jump in from 0 and Kiwami. So I do hope that feeler that Sega put out towards releasing 3 to 5 on PlayStation 4 goes somewhere, so all of Kiryu's games can easily be played on a single hardware platform, allowing everyone easy access to his entire story. You technically can play Yakuza 6 just from having played 0 or Kiwami or even just 0, as there are catch-up materials included on disc for people who missed the titles and want to know what's what. A feature the series tends to have in general, but I still wouldn't recommend this approach. That said, I really did enjoy my time with Yakuza 6. I don't know where it stacks in terms of game releases this year, but that's something we'll see later down the line. It's not as strong a title as Yakuza 0 was, but expecting the high point of the franchise to immediately get overtaken is complete insanity. Anyway, this was AboveUp. I hope you enjoyed this video, and yeah, how do you feel about Yakuza 6? Like, this is a game that is genuinely interesting to talk about. A lot of people have very different feelings about it, and I think everyone is kind of conflicted about the strengths and weaknesses of the title. Like, nobody completely agrees, but at least the conversation around it has mellowed out a lot. I would like to thank everyone who is scrolling on the video right now. If you want to be one of these scrolling boys, you can head over to Patreon and, make a pledge. And after this, we're going back to another Ys video, so please look forward to it. But yeah, see ya.